Our scripture reading comes from Isaiah. You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast, because they trust in you. Ancient words from our tradition for our present day understanding.
Well, we just finished a long sermon series on hope, but I could see while I was doing that people are still living in trauma from current events. And so we're going to begin a series on peace of mind. We're going to look at the traditional scriptures that we're used to, but we're also going to hear from wise people around the world and techniques around the world. You just heard one, breath. We may come back to that later. It's very important to realize that breath is a great way of finding that peaceful place inside us. We'll get back to that. But there's so many things that swirl around us these days, and it's very understandable and human just to want to check out of it all. But the world needs us, and so we need to learn a depth of spirituality that allows us to do both, to care about our human family, to help our human family, to help our planet, but also to live a life of joy and peace individually. Because it's still, no matter what's happening, a miracle that we're here, right? That this human consciousness is a freakish event if you look at the cosmos. So we should both care about what's happening in our time, but also live lives of joy, lives of peace. That's hard to do when you hear about things like the coronavirus, and I see one of you has it already. Another there. It doesn't take long to get hysterical with these kinds of things, right? And that's disconcerting. No, you don't have to. I'm going to cough too. Yeah, I'm going to cough too. So, no, this is the demon cedar. This is not coronavirus. So, we're used to that in Texas. But as scary as the coronavirus is, it's terrifying to realizing the leadership of this country is the ones protecting us from it. That we have science deniers now between us and an epidemic. And this is why over the years I've tried to say that bad religion is not a victimless crime. Right? It's not just being judgmental about an individual. But when our religion requires of us that we check out of reality, that we deny climate science, that we economize our idea of causes by having demons and angels affecting things. Whereas emotionally, in terms of the art of living, those are very powerful and wonderful things that connect us and we feel our connection using that kind of imagery. When they invade into our scientific thinking, it hurts the world. It hurts the world. Daniel was telling me yesterday that the sales of Corona beer have gone down like 30%. Or 38%, something like that. And that's what magical thinking does. It sees one pattern over here and then tries to affect reality over there. It's very human to do that. This is not meant as a criticism of something that's a part of the human condition. At the same time, when you look at the history of religion, there are people who've died because of this. There are wars that were fought because of magical thinking. There were scientific discoveries, medical discoveries that were denied. There were parts of the human condition, LGBTQ, AI people, who worst problem was the Christian religion as it was being expressed in the United States. These are things that call us to do better. If Christianity is a religion of love, then science has to be a part of it, because we have to test our ideas if we're going to love each other. It's easier to live in my beliefs, but my beliefs about you are not you. To stay in contact with you or with life or with nature, I have to get past my beliefs into contact, into love. As wonderful as the wall is, that's a lifeline. It's not going to protect us from an epidemic. You see, nationalism and Christianity are completely incompatible. You understand that? I'm not speaking politically, I'm speaking theologically. Jesus said what we do to each other, we're doing to ourselves. That is as far from nationalism as it gets. It's as far from sectarian religion as it gets. If I believe that Jesus is the one path, it's not very far from that to robbing other people of their religious freedoms or their rights not to be religious at all. So we're talking about something that is incredibly important. But the wonderful thing is it leads us to peace. What we're talking about leads us to peace. That way we can reach past our prejudices and our beliefs. There was a man flying in from California. David was telling me that Sarah saw something on NPR where a man was flying in from China. And he said he's never felt so powerful in his whole life, because every time he coughed, everything cleared out. He says he wound up on a road just by himself. So, again, what we're trying to get at in this passage is a peace of mind and a happiness that doesn't require magic to work. Here's the verse we're looking at today. And I'm choosing very short verses or stories because that's what we need when we're seeking for peace. We need something very short. In the East, they have a thing called the sutras that we get the word suture from an interrelated thing, but it's very short things you can carry with you. You can memorize a verse like this, and then when you're losing balance, turn to that. It says that this is Isaiah talking to God, you will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast because they trust in you. You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast because they trust in you. Now, obviously, that can be magical too. To say if you think about God, you're going to be able to live in peace. But that's not, I think, what Isaiah is saying. Our insight today, excuse me, not Corona. Corona. I hope. Yeah. Our insight today is an ancient, goes back as far as time, to say that as much as life wounds us, what we say inside ourselves about that can wound us even more. That life is hard, there's no question about it, and this life is unfair and all of that. But very often, someone hurts us, and we repeat that hurt for years and years. They hurt us once, and we hurt ourselves 999 times afterwards. Again, this is very human, and there's no guilt or shame because we all do this. At the same time, what a gift to realize that that's unnecessary pain. That what I'm thinking in my head about what has happened to me, and it can be a very real trauma, by not letting myself keep repeating the same wound over and over again, I may more quickly heal. Buddha said it this way. He said, when you keep repeating how somebody has wounded you, you carry your sorrow and pain with you like your own shadow. When you focus on forgiveness, grace, love, you're letting go of that pain. Maybe not overnight, maybe not once. I mean, it doesn't happen like that. But over time, when we develop the habit of realizing that what we think is shaping the world that we're going to live in, Buddha said we are the results of all the things we've thought. Now, this is an attempt to be helpful, and it's not always helpful, right? I mean, if you're in the middle of trauma right now, again, get the sermon later on text, because this isn't something for when we're still in pain. But when we're outgrowing the pain, and we're beginning to realize, okay, I don't need to keep doing this, it's a great gift to realize that while we can't control our feelings, and we shouldn't control our feelings, sadness is good, madness is good, everything you feel is important for your humanity. But it's possible to get stuck in those emotions and they become the world in which we live. And that's what the sages are trying to help us not do. I first learned this from Stoics. And this is, these are both from Marcus Aurelius. He said, why am I have a cough? Why do I always have a cough? So that's bad modeling, right? That's what we're not supposed to do. He said, if you're pained by any external thing, it is not this thing that disturbs you, but your own judgment about it. And it is in your power to wipe out this judgment now. I would put an asterisk and say sometimes, right? Because sometimes pain isn't something you can think your way out of. But when you're healing, the healing time can come more quickly if we realize how we are sort of getting infected with that emotion. He also said, the mind that is free from passions is a citadel, for we have nothing more secure to which we can fly for refuge and repel every attack. In philosophy, you always put an asterisk about it and say sometimes. The problem isn't emotions, but passions means when we're stuck in one emotion and we keep replaying the same story over and over again. And we know it's hurting us, but the mind goes on autopilot. So what these people are teaching us is thought is really speech that's inside, that's internalized. To realize that you're actually speaking to yourself is it's like finding the steering wheel. It's like you've driven for years and you didn't realize there was a steering wheel. That emotionally, what an incredible gift to realize that over time, you can shape what is happening inside of you. Not every time, not always, but over time, you can have an incredible influence over your happiness. In meditation, they call this one-pointedness. And you sometimes see that taught with candles or patterns where you look at something and it stops the mind chasing its own tail for a moment. And you just kind of settle into peacefulness. In Christianity, those deep spiritual lessons are usually taught in stories. Stories you can teach a child. And then they get unpacked into these deep, profound wisdoms sometimes, right? But what has happened is Christianity has been stuck for many people at the concrete level, at the ABC level that was intended to be a helpful guide to get back to spiritual depth. But we get stuck at the surface level with it. James says that the tongue is like the rudder of a ship. And he's not talking about literally the tongue. It's saying realize that there's something in you that guides the ship. And that something is an expression of the creativity of the universe. In the West, we talk about things like Jesus. To get one-pointedness, Jesus, or the will of God. We use that kind of language. In Taoism, they call it the way of nature, the way of life. But to realize that whatever those creative patterns that brought you into being, you are a reflection of that. And you have that within you. I think what Jesus was trying to do is get past spiritual practices to living out one-pointedness. To have every person you encounter be your one-pointedness. Every problem, every experience to be the field in which you realize spiritual joy and peace. Sometimes spirituality is taught in a way where you get caught in the practice. And you can't meditate if you don't have a candle, or you don't have a say, or you can't pray if you don't have a particular beads or something like that. So you have things that are incredibly helpful that we get addicted to. And they can keep us from getting to the depths for which they were designed to lead us. The person who's credited with inventing yoga or discovering yoga said that in its nature, the mind is like a peaceful lake. Do you ever wake up in the morning and you've had a nice night's sleep and you're absolutely at peace and joy? Probably most of the time. To realize that if you were trying to meditate to get there, that might have taken you an hour. So if life is where you're living out your spirituality, then you can take that peacefulness, that deep breathing, and extend it as much as possible through the day. That's a practice that transforms life. But what Patanjali said is that the mind is a peaceful lake, and there are two winds that disturb it. Now realize sages oversimplify things, so you'll be able to think of other things. But he said there are two winds that disturb it. He said the wind of fear and the wind of desire. That when we wake up in the morning, we're at peace. But as soon as we want something, there are waves on the lake. As soon as I think of something I'm afraid of, it creates a ripple in the lake. And you wouldn't be human if you didn't do that. But yoga is keeping a peaceful mind, he said. Right? You have the waves, but they don't become tsunamis. At least that's the hope. This is expressed, though, it has to be very gentle. When you try to force peace on your mind, it's violence. Right? When you're mad at yourself for not being peaceful, that's a problem. I have back problems today as an adult for two reasons. One is football. The other is the way I did yoga. I did yoga like calisthenics. I did yoga like a drill sergeant. So I do the headstands in ways, and if it hurt, well, that's good, right? So I have that as a reminder that sometimes before we become violent with others, we begin with violence on ourselves. And that is not what these teachers are trying to do. To be gentle with yourself, to realize you are going to do it wrong. That's the only starting place we have. Mistakes are the only starting place that any of us have to learn these arts and crafts, right? If you have never gotten angry, that means you've never really felt much. And you can do that, but you do that through apathy. And that's not the peace that's being talked about here. It's something deeper. Now let me read a hymn I used to hate when I was younger. And what we're going to try to do here is not snag on the theology that is being expressed in and see if it's saying another version of what Patanjali, the yoga teacher, was saying. This is a hymn called Peace, Perfect Peace. It goes, peace, perfect peace, in this dark world of sin, the blood of Jesus whispers peace within. Now, I don't like that language, but do you see what it's saying? Don't get caught in the externals. Jesus is the one-pointed image that's taking somebody to something that really everybody has, no matter what their culture. But there's a depth in your heart because you are a child of the universe. So there's a depth in you that's bigger than the political things that we're seeing all around us. Then another verse says, peace, perfect peace, by thronging duties pressed, do the will of Jesus, this is the rest. And what that's saying is when our hearts are in tune with the way of things, whether that's the will of God in our poetry or the way of nature, we have so much less static in the world, right? Because we don't expect reality to be something that it's not. And the final verse is peace, perfect peace, our future's all unknown. Jesus we know, and he is on the throne. Now again, I don't like the language, but do you get the point? That when you're in touch with the creative pattern that has given you birth, you can have a trust that gives you peace even through the storms, because you're not being defined by what's happening to you today. You're part of a story of the unfolding of the cosmos that goes back before human history. And I think when we look at this verse, it's important to realize it's not saying think about God and you'll have peace. It's getting in tune with whatever the source is. Listen again to the wording. It goes, you, and this is again meaning God or the source or the Tao or whatever, you will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast because they trust in you. It's the trust that gives the peace, not the thought. Right? The thought is the one-pointedness. If your culture has taught you to believe in the will of God, then that's how you can get in touch with whatever this source out of which you come is. If you're Taoist, that can be the Tao, the way of nature. If you're atheist, that can be the evolutionary process or the cosmic process. We come out of something, right? And all over the world, cultures try to express that in different ways. But it's there for us all. I'm going to read a couple more kind of squeaky clean religious readings that used to give me the heebie-jeebies. But see, at some point, if we come from a place of depth, then we should be able to absorb different vocabularies and transform them. If they shut us down, we're probably the ones that are shallow. Okay, this is someone talking about what it feels like to find this sense of the source. He says, I felt a great calmness and perfect peace. I had the feelings of a poor man who has just come under the protection of the royal family and has obtained an annual pension for life. The dreadful fear of poverty and want having just left his house forever. I felt the safety and shelter which the little chickens feel under the wings of the hen. This is what it is to abide under the shadow of the Almighty and to hide under God's wings until the dangers are past. Now, see, I would never choose that vocabulary, but do you see how it's personifying for a particular person, a particular culture, that sense of peace that comes from simply being in tune with the changes, with the way of life. Here's another. The secret of God's tabernacle. You don't even have to know what a tabernacle is. It's a tent. The secret of God's tabernacle. In the secret of God's tabernacle, no enemy can find us, and no troubles can reach us. The pride of human beings and the strife of tongues finds no entrance into the pavilion of God. The secret of God's presence is more secure refuge than 1,000 Gibraltars. I do not mean that no trials come. They come in abundance, but they cannot penetrate into the sanctuary of the soul. And we may dwell in perfect peace even in the midst of the fiercest storm. The peace it's talking about here is being at peace with the changes, being tuned with the way things change. It's not a safe place that steps out of life. I haven't ever found that. Perhaps you can. If so, that's great. But if you can't, to realize that even in the real world, with all of the horrors that are happening right now, if you go deep enough, there is a place of peace and of joy that can be there for you. We are surrounded by so many terrifying things. Corona's one of them. I mean, you can name your own, the things that process us. What a wonderful gift to realize that underneath those storms, there's always peace. So that means you can choose joy, you can choose happiness, you can even choose Corona beer. That's your brand. Because you realize that many of the problems that are ruining our lives are not about life so much as what we're saying to ourselves, inside ourselves. Pains that we won't let go of. Hopes that we won't pursue out of fear. If you're Christian, then Jesus can be the symbol of the one-pointedness. Looking into that face can give you the peace to go in and find your source. If you're Taoist, then the way of nature, the way of things, the way things change can lead you to your depths. But ultimately, all of us have to find that one-pointedness in life and what is happening to us in our real lives. Because that is the only place we can find this depth, this joy, this peace. I'll leave you with reading the scripture one more time. Again, Isaiah's praying or meditating about the source. He says, "You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast because they trust in you." I invite you now to your own reflection on these words.